Hello. So, coming to you from my new office, which looks like a low-budget version of Castle Oblivion from Kingdom Hearts 2. This is a probably not that brief explanation of the things that I've done on a recent holiday to Japan. I was going to go through I've gone through a number of working titles for this piece. The first of which I was a little bit schlocky, but I was going to go with this. Thought it was pleasant enough, and then I thought better of it, and I thought maybe I'll go for something a bit more like so. And then I thought, let's be quite open and honest and frank about what actually happened here. So, Japan. I'm going to break this down into a number of sections, make it a bit more digestible. So I'm going to break this down into general notes about the country. Incidentally, this is the rough script I'm working to. There's quite a lot of it because when I went over there, took my little notepad, which I was recording in pretty much the entire time. Also, apologies for any background noise. It's bonfire night and folk around here start real early. So, to break this down into sort of general notes and sort of cultural information, things that would be useful to know if you go over there and don't particularly know anything about it. I'd advise you to do some research before you go, though. It's just a cool thing to do if you go into someone else's country. Just have a bit of an idea of do's and don'ts. I'm not going to go into everything, just things that I found personally that I didn't necessarily hear about before I went. Then I'm going to go into general notes about travelling over there. General notes about the food over there, which is a real big topic all on its own, and then individual videos about the regions that we went to. We went there over the course of 3 weeks. It's an incredibly long holiday that we went on, and getting back home, I've only been in the country now for 4 or 5 days, and I'm still having trouble integrating. Although the home comforts are nice, are real nice, but I would be quite happy if we just happened to wake up back over there again. So, I'm going to kick this off with the cultural information, and then, incidentally, all of these are going to be in no particular order, and then we'll move on. Well, I mean, it'll be in the titles of the videos, you'll work it out. So, what I would say is probably the number one thing. We went over one day after there was no longer a legal requirement to obtain a tourist visa to enter the country. It was a bit touch and go as to whether that was going to be actually, you know, viable. We very nearly sent our passports over to the local embassy and didn't necessarily get them back in time, but it turned out that we didn't need them in the end, so we didn't need the visas, so it all worked out. Just. But the one thing is, if you're going over there during a time when people are even still considering coronavirus, I know that that's an upsetting word for a lot of people, and I do apologise if that's an issue for you. But it's a reality, especially over there. Then just be aware that they have had very strict rules for dealing with coronavirus. Rules that, if you're from the UK, have been by and large thrown out of the window unless you're in a medical setting. So a lot of things are different there. They still have hand sanitizer all over the place, and they still have signs advising 2 meter social distancing. And while there are signs all over the place saying, if you're in an indoor setting, please wear your mask. If you're in an outdoor setting, it doesn't matter. The majority of people are still wearing masks outside, so just be a little bit mindful that what you're used to dealing with may not necessarily be what they are comfortable with dealing with, and in general, you would be better off living as if the pandemic were still in completely full effect. So just give people a bit of a wide berth, and you know, be careful about how you're coughing in public. It's probably a reasonable idea to wear a mask most of the time, except for when you're eating and drinking. But I mean, just use your own best judgment. The one thing I would say is there is a discrepancy you will find between what is posted as official guidance on, in public areas and in, literature that you may receive, and what people are actually doing. And unless what people are doing appears to be less safe than the guidance, I would probably do what people are doing rather than what people are saying to do, including their government. So just be overly cautious. People will probably be happier about it. It wasn't an issue for us or anything. At no point was it an issue with anyone, but just it just be kind. That's the best thing you can do, and be a little bit mindful because they are coming out of this situation. We came out of it a long time ago, and probably not for the better, to be honest. And they're still, I think, pretty scared about it, rightfully so. So you just be mindful. Um, the other things. There is a general level of discomfort around people from outside the country. Um, Try not to be too offended if you, for example, go into a subway car and someone immediately leaves and goes to an adjacent subway car because they don't want to share the subway car with you. Because that did happen, at least, well, it happened once. Most people are okay. Some people are uncomfortable, and it can be quite obvious that they're uncomfortable. It is a country that hasn't had outsiders for tourist purposes for quite a long time, and a lot of the things we do are a little bit strange to them. And in particular, a lot of them are very uncomfortable with the idea that someone may, you know, start speaking English around them or to them. I genuinely don't believe it comes from a place of malice. It's just an unfamiliarity with, people with outsiders. Um, so you may see, particularly with restaurants, they will not be particularly happy about entertaining the idea of English-speaking clients. Um, I've had this explained in a couple of ways, but the best one I've seen so far was on the door of an establishment that said, if you're an English speaker, we prefer not to accept reservations from you, simply because we won't be able to properly understand you and we won't be able to give you the level of customer service that we would like to give to our guests. And phrased like that, it actually came off as pretty reasonable. Like if you're running a restaurant and the person doesn't know how to speak to you, then you can't necessarily communicate things like whether you have an allergy or whether there are certain things you don't like to eat, or you may not be able to read the menu, and that creates a difficult situation for some people, and that's okay. So the one thing I would say about restaurants is it's worth making reservations if you're going to go to a restaurant, or sometimes if you're going to go to a crowded public venue, just to make sure that they're going to be okay with it, pretty much. Yeah, I'm not familiar with establishments having a right to refuse clientele, apart from on grounds of being openly drunk, obscene, loud, or whatever. But it is a right that they have. It's their establishment, and refusal may cause offence. So just check ahead. If you're staying in a hotel, maybe get them to ask on your behalf, just so that there's no ambiguity about what you're trying to ask them. It's it, it's fine. Most places are fine, but it's worth being aware before you go and do things. Um, so, advertising. A bit of a strange thing to cover, but advertising just is all over the place. I mean, especially if you're in cities, like any other city in the world, advertising is absolutely crammed down your throat at all times. I found that advertising comes in one of two forms. You either have a professional man or woman on a screen or on a billboard or whatever, wearing a suit with a confident look on their face, just firmly endorsing a product like I am a face you can trust, therefore this is a product you can trust. which is not too dissimilar to how things like wristwatches and pens and such like are marketed in other countries. The other kind of advertising you'll get is hyperactive, incredibly colourful, loud, and will feature people screaming and laughing and endorsing a product like it will bring about the second coming of Christ. Just hyper energetic, really attention grabbing, really colourful, and it's baffling because some of the things they'll be advertising are very mundane. We got a set of adverts on. We had a subway car that was endorsed by one specific brand of bubble bath. All the floors were covered in adverts for the bubble bath. All the walls were covered in adverts for the bubble bath. All the screens had repeated looping adverts with animation on them advertising this particular brand of bubble bath. And I almost wanted to buy it to see why it was worth that level of advertising, but it was very present and loud, and not something that I'm particularly familiar with. So the advertising of products, especially in cities, especially in Tokyo in particular, you might find surprising. It feeds into, I believe, what they refer to as Genki culture. So Genki, from what little I remember of the language lessons I took, is just sort of a term to mean like wellness, like energeticness, just sort of like just a state of internal happiness and well-being. And a lot of people, especially on television, especially the younger generation over there, are very much into this whole Genki thing. They are very, very happy, very energetic, very, very present, quite a lot of the time. I'm from a region that has very nearly made depression like a national standard. Yorkshire is a particularly dour location, and it's ingrained into my very psyche that things just tone it down a little bit. Not everyone needs to be screaming all the time about things being wonderful. And after about 4 days, I found it a little bit tiring. You get used to it after a little bit, but just be aware that people are going to be a lot more. They're either going to be incredibly emotionally reserved, which is cool, and I can relate to that, or they're going to be incredibly. I don't even want to say emotionally open. They are going to be just on, really on. And it's a sight to behold when you're in the thick of it, especially in certain regions. Akihabara, big one. But just be aware that it's coming. It won't be a problem, but be aware that it's coming because it may be a bit of a shock. So yeah, feeding on to my next point, actually, people either seem to be just absolutely happy, real happy, or very stressed, one or the other, or asleep on account of being really stressed and being unable to get a full amount of sleep and having fallen asleep on public transport. That happens every now and then. They do seem to have an innate ability to wake up exactly when they need to, which is really impressive. Anime. Anime is way more of a cultural phenomenon over there than it is over here for real obvious reasons because, that's where most of it comes from. You can expect to see it in places that you wouldn't really think you would, especially in Tokyo. You'll see it all over the place in transit hubs, like train stations, subway stations, bus stations. Well, we didn't go to any bus stations, but you'll see it in advertising. You'll see it on walls advertising faintly mundane products. At one point, I did see an advert for Jim Beam whiskey that just had like a cowboy-looking anime woman advertising it, and it's like that's not where I'd expect to see that, but it's just part of the culture. It's part of it's part of what's ingrained into it. So, in the same way that we quite often get cartoons advertising things over here, we quite often get anime advertising things over there, and it makes sense. It's just you will see a lot more anime than you would probably think you would. But it won't necessarily be from any recognizable shows. Although you may see recognizable shows, and they may be in weird cross promotional things with other brands. Like, I think we did see one anime character that was used in a cross promotion with a chain bakery, which was very strange. It was just like this anime lady holding a couple of ham baguettes, and I wasn't really quite sure what to make of that. Hmm. Um, Temples and shrines. You'll see a lot of them. You'll see an awful lot of shrines. The religions over there, predominantly Shinto and Buddhism. As a result, it's absolutely lousy with shrines. Although, as my father-in-law stated, if you come over to Europe, it's pretty lousy with churches. They're all over the place. Um, One thing to know is that if you're going to temples, they tend to be pretty reverential. They'll be, quite serious. Just be respectful, as you probably would going to any religious establishment. Shrines are either um, not particularly manned by anyone, they just exist to be a shrine to some local deity, or they will have a bit of a festival culture around them. If you go to a particularly large shrine, you may find it's a really good place to get street food because they tend to have local festivals and they tend to be like public hotspots for people to just, congregate, have a bit of a day trip. They're worth seeing. Every temple and every shrine has its own personality, has its own focus. We've been to some particularly large temples, we've been to some smaller temples, we've been to some huge shrines, we've been to some shrines that were no more than a like five, maybe like a 20 by 5 foot corridor on a city street. There was just like a very small shrine with a few offerings of like 1 cup sake and Pocari Sweat. Um, they're worth seeing. Almost all of them are worth seeing. Some of them have an awful lot of personality. Some are really interesting. Some of them are a bit more, mundane. They're smaller, and yeah, but they are worth looking at if you happen to be passing one. Just be aware that temples and shrines tend to have pretty different vibes. Um, you may experience, like I experienced when we went over there again, just after the changes to the visas. As such, not as many foreigners as you'd normally expect to see. So I did start feeling an odd sense of kinship anytime I saw anyone who looked. I was going to say European or American, but to be honest, anytime I saw another white guy, you know, someone that looked like they were from my rough cultural background. Um, so you may experience a bit of a sense of camaraderie with people you've never even met just because you've got one real obvious thing in common, and there's a decent chance you might be able to speak a common language. I mean, whether or not you decide to start conversations with strangers, that's entirely your prerogative. I didn't. I normally do, but it's a bit more reserved over there, and I try not to get too in people's faces. Um, Even if you have learnt to speak the language, do be aware that one thing about Japan is that you're supposed to speak it with a pretty flat intonation, I think the word is. So it's not a language that you speak with, like rising inflection or anything for questions, things like that. It's a pretty flat pronunciation. There's a guy on YouTube called Dogen, I think, who does particularly good non-native but fluent Japanese speech, which can give you a bit of an idea of how it's normally spoken over there. I'm only saying this because if you do speak Japanese, if you attempt to speak Japanese, just try to pronounce things in a way that they would. So I've heard a lot of people say, you're going to sound racist, but try to affect a Japanese accent. It's not bad advice because when I'm going up to people and dropping like, sumimasen, toire wa doku desu ka, that unless they're listening really carefully, they are not
necessarily cognizant that I'm asking where the toilet is. Um, and I mean, my Japanese wasn't good anyway. I'd been learning for about a year. I'd forgotten a lot of what I learned, and a year is nowhere near enough. It is a very difficult language to learn. Um, but yeah, be mindful of your accent. Be mindful of how you're pronouncing things. Don't be afraid of maybe just saying things slowly and a little bit clearly, just to give people a bit of a chance. It's what else? No matter what you do, you're probably going to be a little bit of a spectacle, especially in this just recently post-pandemic thing. Um, People do not generally deviate from a surprisingly small number of templates, I find. People generally look of a particular style. So you'll get like your business people, you'll get your young people, whatever. But if you obviously look like you're from the outside, you're not from the country, um, you will be a likely to be a source of interest to certain people. Not everybody, but we have had people just come up to us and have a really hard look at us for like half a minute and then just kind of wander off. And it's like, it takes a little bit of getting used to. It's not really a problem, but you may just find people taking taking quite a close interest, especially if, say, if you're overweight. I mean, I am fairly overweight, and it's not a thing that really exists over there. The majority of people are really quite slim, so overweight people not that common over there, and that's another thing that may draw some attention. So you just be aware people are probably going to be looking at you. Um, what else? If you're of a particularly I don't want to say chaste disposition, but I do count myself in this number. Just be aware that sex in advertising can be a little bit more common than you would expect it to be, especially with how naturally reserved the society tends to be. So you'll see a lot more. You'll you'll see like ladies in bikinis on like billboards just openly on streets advertising various functions, usually girl bars and things like that. But it can be it's a little unusual. It's the kind of thing that I wouldn't normally expect on public streets, maybe in certain areas over here, but it's more common over there. So again, just be aware of that. Um, have I done anything open I shouldn't have? No, that is fine. What else? Um, Animals. Okay, this isn't necessarily a great thing. Treatment of animals is different over there. Um, if you have a very strong inclination towards the care about the treatment of animals, be aware that things are going to be a little bit different there. So it's like we've seen a number of street entertainers. I don't even know if they were street entertainers. I think they may be just people who liked getting out into the public, but they'll have like animals with them that are just they just take out to be a bit of a spectacle. I think sometimes it's like we came across a guy who had like a pet rabbit that he just brought out with him and just kept it like leashed to a table while he was out, and people were just petting rabbit and talking to him and that. And that I mean that was on the better end of things, but it's like we did see a lot of like I did see one particular temple that had a trained monkey in a little outfit that was having to perform like quite strict little acrobatic routines, and everyone was like just gathered around and clapping and that. And it's like it's you kind of feel for him sometimes. I'm not a big animal guy, but I did get a little uncomfortable occasionally. And it's like it's like we went to a restaurant one time and came out and there was like a just a turtle in a tank outside in like an empty aquarium with like an inch of water in it, and it didn't look like it had a particularly great life. But I mean, I don't know. I'm not really judging. It's just that just be aware that animals may be used in different ways that you're used to. Um, if that kind of thing makes you uncomfortable, I would particularly advise avoiding things like animal cafes. So you get like cat cafes, dog cafes. We had a ferret cafe, an owl cafe. We didn't go to any of them. They're just places I've heard of. Um, so they may be worth skipping, possibly. Um, or at least if you're going to go into any of them, maybe just look them up so that you know what you're getting into on an individual basis. I'm sure that every place has their own way of handling things. Um, oh, one thing about the entire country, what really struck me, especially in the cities, is it feels like it's been very recently redesigned just from the ground up, completely fresh. So everything looks like it's been built and planned such that according to modern requirements, it's all very efficient, very safe, very clean, and just very well thought out. So things just work. Things just make sense in a lot of ways. So over here, you'll get like you might say we have a phenomenon over here where we have like toll roads that only charge like a pittance because they're tied into some hundreds of years old law that it would be too expensive to repeal or alter. And so the toll road still charges like there's one that we've been through that charged about 17 pence. Um, you get a lot less of things just seeming to happen because they've always happened. It feels like things have been thought out, revamped, renewed, and changed according to changes in technology, changes in culture, and also just changes in like influx of new people. I mean, I gather that quite a few things have been altered over there with the recent Olympics. I mean, most signs that we saw were in English and Japanese, and it all felt very like accommodating and modernised, and just if I miss anything about that country, it's the way that everything appears to just have been thought about, even things that are a part of everyday life, and it would probably be difficult to change them. They have been changed. Um, television, we didn't watch a lot of it. We were out most of the time. What I have experienced of it, if you do watch TV and you're from a Western country, you'll probably find it very strange, very twee, or you'll be surprised at how much home shopping is broadcast. There's a lot, an awful lot. Um, there seems to be more acceptance and almost expectation of people being borderline falling down drunk. Signs all over the subways whenever you go on them in certain large stations, and saying that just giving advisory for people who've had too much, just to be careful around the lines, advice on what to do if you do happen to fall on the lines and things like that. Drinking is a little more I won't say ingrained into the culture, but it's kind of more acceptable and expected almost. Um, so uh, that was unusual. Well, not unusual, but it was strange to sort of see it openly in public. And the only other thing I'm going to put on this video is no matter what you do, if you do something wrong, no one will really be likely to tell you um, unless you try to wear shoes in a place where you shouldn't wear shoes. I've heard a lot of people say, be careful when you enter any establishment, make sure you're looking around the entrance to see if the shoes go somewhere, see if there's any slippers provided. We found that most tourist areas that require you to remove shoes have obvious signs, usually an attendant to make sure that you're doing it, which is very helpful. But just anytime you go through a door, just check, because that, I've heard, is the one thing you may actually get corrected on, and they will not be particularly pleased about it. So I think that is all the cultural stuff, so I shall move on.